Hello everybody, welcome to Deluxe Collectibles, and today I'm going to be discussing when I think LEGO Ninjago Legacy should conclude, and this topic came about because I was watching a video that was discussing the oversaturation of LEGO Star Wars, and with of course how many remakes they wind up doing for their iconic ships, locations, and I think that there are positives and negatives with that, and I wanted to of course relate it to Ninjago, so I thought it would work really well with Legacy specifically because of course that's where they're going back and then remaking sets or making just entirely new sets as well, things that we wound up missing from previous Ninjago seasons. So it's a bit of a different situation with Ninjago compared to Star Wars, but sort of a similar situation where you kind of run into the potential issue of kind of oversaturating the market, and I definitely don't want to see that for Ninjago. So specifically what I mean by oversaturation is something such as, let's say, the Destiny's Bounty. We've seen of course a legacy version of it, but I want to think about, do you think in maybe let's say 3 or 4 years we could wind up seeing another version of that exact same Destiny's Bounty? Something like that is something that I kind of don't want to see for Ninjago, but let me think about it in this sort of way of that a new perspective coming into Ninjago, and that's kind of what I want to do, is kind of take myself out of the position that I'm in, where most likely I'm going to pick up that Destiny's Bounty and then be satisfied with that version, but of course someone new coming into the theme might want to be able to get themselves a version, and of course that one is not going to be available on the market most likely unless you buy it from a third-party seller. So it makes sense in that regard as well. I think that more so things like this kind of more relate to the people who are long-time fans collecting the theme for a long amount of time, and you might not want to have multiples of the same vehicle on your shelf. I think that Legacy works the first time around really well because of course many of those sets that were made back then, especially ones like that, like the original Destiny's Bounty, there are so many improvements that LEGO can make now with their builds and have so much larger scale, more detailed, just better parts being used as well within the sets also, that you can make so many necessary improvements. And of course if you are able to do that with a model, once again I do welcome it. That's something with Star Wars that of course you see, where you have the classic vehicles, of course things like the Millennium Falcon, but I feel like with each new version they are like improving upon it. I think they do a good job at that. Of course you even get the super large scale ones of course with the super big Millennium Falcons, so I think that you have circumstances like that as well. Now, do I want to see something like that for Ninjago? Not necessarily, but I think that I can kind of see that perspective as well. And with Legacy, of course, this is thinking very far ahead. Legacy still has a lot more to cover. Of course, it started up in early 2019 with starting to just cover things like from season 1 and then going forward with season 2, 3, 4. Now we're getting into season 5 as well, which is kind of the most recent one that we've seen them cover, of course, with the Possession Zane's Titan mech set, and I think that's really great that we're seeing them dive into that. So we still have quite a bit to go. You have season 6, of course, Skybound, you gotta get into Hands of Time, and I think it's going to be really interesting when we get into like Sons of Garmadon and things like that, where we saw big changes for Ninjago. Of course, that's when the ninjas saw complete redesigns, of course, of their characters, and I think that that's just really interesting to kind of think about how we're going to get to that point. And I think for me specifically, because that's kind of when I started to go, or at least was able to purchase more Ninjago sets at that point, because I was in a better financial spot for that, and I collected more of it. So it's going to be interesting, because something like the sets from 2011, I wasn't able to get too many of those, because of course it just wasn't in a scenario where I was able to just pick them up for myself. But I think it's really cool how you're going to get to a point where we're at, let's say, really far into the future, of course, but where you're getting potentially legacy sets for things like Seabound, Master of the Mountain, some of the most recent seasons that we're seeing, and that's an entirely other discussion as well. Do we want them to go that far? Now, I think there is necessity for it in Ninjago just as a theme as a whole, because of course, with something like Seabound, the sets are really great that we did wind up getting, but of course, there's still characters that you can receive. There's still improvements that can be made. For instance, let's say the new Nia minifigure, the NRG version of her. I think that there are some changes that could be made to that figure. I think that it's still a fantastic figure, don't get me wrong, but I think that there are some changes that could be made, of course, to make it more accurate to its in-show counterpart. So I think there are things that you can do and improvements that can be made to sets that I think do kind of warrant the necessity of having a sub-theme like Legacy, but also I can kind of see the perspective of maybe oversaturation of the market and just maybe a bit too much of it, but it all kind of depends depends as well on how long Ninjago continues to run. I think that it has a very bright future ahead of it, so I think that we're going to see quite a bit more of that. And what's kind of going to last longer? Are we going to see a conclusion for Ninjago? I'm not going to say when, of course, because I would have no idea, but eventually when we might see something like that, is Legacy going to keep continuing past that? Because of course it might have to catch up to that finale of Ninjago, and that's really interesting because it's kind of a situation like, when Ninjago ends, is it really over, or are we going to see a continuation of that? It's like something like, let's relate it to Star Wars, as I've kind of been doing in this video, like the Rise of Skywalker trilogy, or the new trilogy, the Disney one. It's kind of like that. If we see more sets for that, of course that trilogy is concluded, but we're still seeing sets for it. So is that something with Ninjago? I think I've done a video on this, where can the sets still be made even after the show is concluded? But that's kind of an entirely different discussion. I don't want to get too much into that, but I kind of just want to hear your thoughts and opinions on Legacy down below. Let me know how long you think the sub-theme should last, or what do you want to see it do? Of course, there's a ton of builds and things that we've seen in the Ninjago series that we've never had in set form, so I would love to see them cover some things like that. Of course, more villain vehicles as well, once again an entirely other topic as well, because that's definitely something missing from Legacy. But let me know all of your thoughts and opinions down below, and if you did enjoy this video, it would be highly appreciated if you could leave a like down below. Also subscribe as well if you would like to check out some of my other content. That would be highly appreciated. So thank you so much. I will see you all next time, and always remember, keep on collecting.